Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you. So we are about celebrating community and belonging today. That's the message today, is the power of belonging. How many of you are from small towns? I am. I grew up in a town of 400, went to high school in a town of 1,100. You kind of belong automatically in a small town because everybody knows your business. In a small town like that, there were these two brothers, Leroy and Elroy. They were trouble from the get-go. Always in trouble, and it just continued through their teenage years, got worse, right on into adulthood. They were always just causing trouble for the whole town. Well, finally, Leroy died, and everyone was surprised at how hard Elroy took it, that he actually did have a heart. He was just grief-stricken that he had lost his running buddy, his partner in crime, his beloved brother. And so Elroy went to one of the churches and convinced the pastor there to do the funeral service, even though they had never darkened the doors of a church. And so they're making all the arrangements for the service, and then Elroy says, "Pastor, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to tell everybody in this town that Leroy was a saint." And the pastor started to raise an objection. He said, "And if you do that, I'll give a $10,000 donation to the church." Well, the pastor was in a dilemma. He didn't want to lie, but he didn't want to turn down a $10,000 gift. I feel his pain. So he sort of reluctantly, hesitantly agreed to the conditions of the gift and took the check. Well, Elroy went all around town telling people that they were having the funeral at the church, and the pastor was going to say that Leroy was a saint. So they all turned out. They wanted to see how the pastor was going to get out of this one. The church was packed. So the pastor rises up. He speaks a beautiful and solemn prayer. He looks out across the crowded sanctuary and he says this: "You knew this man. You knew that he stole, he lied, he cheated, he caroused with your women, he drank. But compared to his brother Elroy, he was a saint." It's all relative. They needed a family constellation, John. They really did. Today we're talking about the power of belonging, which I think is a great setup into our Adventures in Faith program. We can study these principles and practice these teachings in our lives, and we can do it on our own. There's nothing in any of our Unity teachings that says we must gather in community. But what we find is that it's essential for our spiritual health and well-being to have companions along the path. It's essential. And why is it? Well, there's a philosophical underpinning in our name. You may just think it's a great name that feels good. Unity, that feels good. No, it's actually much deeper than that. It speaks to the idea that there is nothing but the one presence, the one life, the one power. We call it God, but it's called by many names, and there are many aspects of the divine, but it's one. I have two fingers up, but I mean one. It's one thing. And this is what distinguishes us from many Christian churches and many Western faith traditions, because this is where we are more in alignment with some of the Eastern faith traditions, Buddhism, Hinduism. There's a deep understanding that there is no space where God is not present, that we are a part of this thing, that we're not dualistic. We don't believe that humanity has fallen from grace and we got to somehow, through atonement and forgiveness, get back to God. We are already with God. And by practicing these truths, we are transformed into who we already are. We belong. We belong to the universe. We belong to the all that is. And when we know this, when we live in harmony, we become a beneficial presence on the planet, and we experience the abundant life that Jesus taught us about. And when we do not, we can cause harm. I don't know if you saw the news this week, but a great study, a large study, it's not great results, but in the last 50 years, we've lost 29% of our bird population. 3 billion birds fewer now than were here 50 years ago. This isn't good news. This means that something is out of harmony, something is out of order. And I'm not here to give an environmental activist talk. That's not what this is about. It's pointing us to a spiritual truth, that we are meant to live in harmony with all that is. And when we believe ourselves to be separate, we act in ways that are harmful to ourselves and to the all. I normally don't pull out my phone during a talk, but yes, I'm on Facebook Sunday mornings. Okay, give me a break. Message was finished. I was getting ready, and my friend David Goldberg posted this one. It's a quote by Brooke Hampton. "No, we don't need more sleep. It's our souls that are tired, not our bodies. We need nature. We need magic. We need adventure. We need freedom. We need truth. We need stillness. We don't need more sleep. We need to wake up and live." Isn't that good? And some of us need more sleep too. Especially the moms. Do you see what that's pointing us to? When's the last time you stood in a forest alone and silent? When's the last time you stood by the ocean? When's the last time you allowed yourself to simply be? We're so focused on the doing. How many of you have a to-do list that's never going to get done? How many of you? So a few of you are honest about it. It won't. And it's not the point. Of course we have things we need to do, but we must be. And if we can find time, make time, create space in our lives to connect, we are healed by this teaching of unity, of oneness, of harmony, of connection. We belong to the all. And that means that we belong to each other. This one's harder than the ocean. I don't know if you noticed this. When you look around, sometimes people act weird. Have anybody else noticed that? When we were creating our new guiding words, we started 2 years ago in the process, and about 1 year and 9 months ago, we revealed the first phase of it, which was our purpose and values statement. And I love our values. They speak to who we are as a community, that we are about being, becoming, and belonging. Being is our spiritual truth, that we're one with God, we're one with each other, we're meant to live abundantly. Becoming, it acknowledges the fact that we have something in the way of that truth. We have something that needs to be healed, something that needs to be revealed in our consciousness, so we have practice. We have healing modalities and teachings so that we can become who we already are. But the third one is belonging. It says this: we create a spiritual home for all people, knowing that we are one body and that we belong to each other. A lot of people in this community have done a lot of work, 12-step and otherwise, therapy, and several of them came up to us, those who were on the leadership team creating those words, and said, "I don't want to belong to everybody." And we know that there is an unhealthy quality called codependence that can happen, where I'm overly attached to the outcomes and to other people. And so we learn in our spiritual growth and our personal growth that we have to become responsible for ourselves and learn to set appropriate boundaries. Yes and amen. So we do move from codependence to independence. But belonging does not live there. What we find is that we have to move from independence to interdependence, where in healthy and appropriate ways we are vulnerable and available to each other for deeper connection, for deeper support. My friend Chris Terry, she had created her own definition for codependence. It says we all need each other, but if you feel like that need can only be met by one individual, that's codependence. But we need people. Stanford University is in the midst of a tremendous project. It's called the Stanford Belonging Project, and this is some of the language they're using to describe why they're conducting all sorts of experiments and testing and surveys and studies. And it says this: the importance of the feeling of belonging has been demonstrated through empirical work on human resilience and identity formation, and on factors that promote emotional health and personal well-being. Even in the context of adversity and trauma, studies focused on risk factors giving rise to poor health outcomes have also shown how crucial the experience of belonging can be. Moreover, clear evidence has shown that individuals in distress who feel they are disconnected and not part of a larger community are especially vulnerable to poor outcomes, including impulsive and self-harmful behavior. I know that sounds very science-y and wordy. I wanted it to. I want you to see that any way you look at this thing, we need each other. It's proven. There are the facts. You can see it. You can measure it. You can determine that people who do not have a sense of belonging and connection in their life suffer for it. It's our spiritual teaching made manifest on another level. As we've been reimagining this new chapter, of our community, we're stepping into a second century of this teaching. We keep asking what's needed now, and this is what keeps coming back resoundingly: connection, belonging, community. Because as I said, you can get these teachings and practice them on your own, but you cannot get this feeling and this experience of connection anywhere else. My vision, and it's not just mine, I don't mean like I'm making this happen. Like, as the spiritual leader, my job is to sense into what God is revealing, what wants to happen next, but I'm doing it with this amazing team of leadership all over the church. And what we're sensing into is we want to create a space so that people can practice these teachings of being transformed by truth and do it together in a way that heals old family structures and beliefs, in a way that heals centuries of institutional racism. We want to do it in ways so that we can belong to each other in a greater and greater way. And it's hard work. I don't mind either of those words. I mean, my dad would probably roll over in his grave if he were still there. I know he's everywhere, as Karen Tudor says. When someone dies, they don't go anywhere, they go everywhere. But my dad did not think I was a hard worker as a kid. But I have come to see the value of rolling up my sleeves and pitching in to do the work of community and to do the work of my own healing, because it will get difficult sometimes, and we'll want to quit. We'll want to go away. There is a great temptation to separation. And I'll tell you this too. We don't need to connect the way we used to. We have now created all this automation, and we can even get any movie that we want, any song that's ever been written on our phone. I don't need to talk to you all to be entertained anymore. I've got it. It's all available to me. But the deeper need to know and be known is not going away. And so, as I've been saying Sunday after Sunday, we are the most connected and the most isolated generation in history. And many of you are following that temptation to isolate rather than connect. So the whole purpose of doing this 6-week program and the spirit groups is to give you the doorway to step into authentic community. We're giving a remedy to the isolation. And it's difficult sometimes, because people, no matter how spiritual they are, sometimes they're still human. Have you noticed? And so my vision is that we not only learn how to open and be vulnerable, we learn how to set appropriate boundaries and respect our own boundaries and those of the people next to us. This is all part of building community for the 21st century, whichever we are. It's the second century of unity. Jesus talked about it. Not codependence or boundaries, but he used a different language. In the Western faith traditions, it is, I mentioned, it's very dualistic. And some of you may be familiar with the Code of Hammurabi. It was actually civil rights legislation of its time that said we need some rules about how we deal with each other. And so what it says is an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It's justice, right? And Jesus said, I want to point to something higher. I want to point to something that goes beyond payback and retribution. I want to point to something about belonging and non-duality. So this is from Matthew chapter 5, the Sermon on the Mount, starting with verse 38. You have heard it said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. It sounds like bad boundaries. That's not what he's talking about. He's calling us beyond the human understanding of right and wrong. As Rumi said, there is a field out beyond the ideas of right doing and wrong doing. I will meet you there. There is a place of unity and connection. And when we lift ourselves there, we heal ourselves, we heal our families, we heal our church, we heal our country, we heal humanity. Course in Miracles. There's a chapter on the circle of atonement. It says this: each one you see, each person you see, you place within the holy circle of atonement or leave outside, judging him fit for crucifixion or redemption. If you bring him into the circle of purity, you will rest there with him. If you leave him without, you join him there. This is a teaching of oneness. Earlier there in the chapter it says, to accuse is to not understand. And the temptation is great to otherize, to accuse, to call people into wrongdoing. We see it. People ain't acting right in this world. And the temptation to go into duality and blame is great. But it doesn't help. John is also a great Course in Miracles teacher. He leads a group here on Monday nights at 7:30 over in the annex. And last summer, he gave a workshop on the Course. We had a great turnout. And he created an exercise for that workshop, which really, really love it. I'm totally going to steal it in my next workshop. But it's based on the idea of the circle of atonement. He and I were walking in Herman Park one morning, and he kind of floated this idea. Well, he had us gather in circles of 8 or 10, and then one by one, it was our turn, and we would choose someone that we were in conflict with internally. Often a parent, I found out. But we would choose someone, and then we would ask someone in the circle if they would be willing to represent that person in our lives. And the moment that they agreed, they took us by the hand and took us outside the circle. And then we sat with that person until we could find a place of resolution and forgiveness, and then they brought us back into the circle. Because when we judge another, we take ourselves out of unity. We take ourselves out of belonging. We take ourselves out of connection. That when we are judging another, the sword is over our own head. Do you feel it? Do you see what we're seeing here? That we must come into an understanding that we belong to each other. And there is healing here. A young couple, Timothy and Amy, they fell in love early and they were good kids. And they decided to get married early against the advice of many well-wishing family and friends. They got married quite young. They decided they were really ready to have kids in their early 20s. And family urged them to wait, but they didn't, and they had children. They were naturally good parents. I have a nephew and his wife, they're like this. They had 5 kids by the time they were 24, and they're great at it. They're just great parents, and that's the way Timothy and Amy were. And as their kids were getting a little older, they realized that they wanted to have more love for kids. They didn't need to bring any more of their own biological children into the world, so they decided to foster. And they began the foster parent experience, but then they found that it was too heartbreaking when the children left. So they knew that they were called to be the forever home for children, but not just any children, children in deep need. And that's how Ellie came into their lives. Ellie had been adopted by another family, but her behavior was so difficult, the adoption was dissolved. And she was placed back in the system. She was 8. And Timothy and Amy decided that they would be the ones to parent this child. So they read her entire file, and they saw that she was very defiant and very disobedient, and so much so that the previous family, they did an annual trip to Disney World, but Ellie's behavior was so bad they wouldn't take her. She stayed with friends while they went to Disney World. And so Timothy saw this as a healing opportunity. Soon after the adoption was final and Ellie was fully in the home, he made an announcement that we're going to Disney World. And looked her in the eye, thinking that making this would encourage her to better behavior. It did not work. As a matter of fact, it seemed to escalate her defiance and her disobedience. The closer they got to the trip, the worse it got. Finally, they were about a month away, and she was just awful. She was stealing food when all she would have had to do was ask for a snack. She was being cruel to her brothers and sisters. Anything that they were trying to get her to do, she wouldn't do it. And finally, Timothy took her in his arms and said, "What's going on?" And she looked up at him with tears in her eyes and she said, "You're not going to let me go to Disney World, are you?" And he had a moment where he was tempted to say, "Not unless you start acting right." But he knew that was the pattern of behavior that had kept her in this place. And so he had a moment of grace and awareness. And he said, "Who is going on this trip?" She said, "The family." And he said, "Are you a part of this family?" She said, "Yes." "Fine. There will be consequences for your actions, but you are going to Disney World." And he thought, well, maybe this will be the thing that turns the tide. Continued to devolve. She was so bad. And then they finally arrived. They get to the park, and it's, long lines, hot weather, expensive food, a really great time. It is magical, John Moore, I know. It was wonderful. And they came later that night. They got back to the hotel, and they were all exhausted, and he was, making sure the kids were all tucked in, and he comes over to Ellie's bed, and she had a great day, an amazing day, and she was exhausted. So he's hugging her, tucking her in with her stuffed unicorn, saying the prayers, and he said, "Ellie, tell me, what was the best part about this day?" She looked at him, and this is a true story, y'all. She said, "The best part is that I got to come to Disney World, not because I was good, but because I'm yours." That is belonging. You are invited into true community here, not because you're good, not because you believe the right things, not because of any of that, but because you're ours. You're ours. Let us love you. God bless you. Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.